Hello, welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm your host, Nikki Wellman. Mi Moshe ad Moshe, lo kam ke Moshe. From Moses to Moses, there was none like Moses. These words inscribed on the tombstone of the Rambam are an accurate description of the impact this legendary Torah scholar had not only on Jews of his generation, but on Jews of all generations. Today on Simcha, we learn more about this highly intellectual sage who was way ahead of his time.
Maimonides was born in Cordoba in 1135 and died in Cairo, then known as Fostat, in the year 1204. He is understood to be probably the greatest intellect of the Jewish Middle Ages. Whether one agreed with his approach to philosophy and halakha, to Jewish law, all had to deal with him, and all roads went through the Rambam, Maimonides. He was what we would today call a polymath in many ways. His greatest works, but certainly not his only, are the Mishnah Torah, his great legal code, and the Guide for the Perplexed, the Moreh Nevuchim, his great philosophical work. Many people find it difficult to understand how the same person could have been so immersed in the halakha and the legal process, and that same person have such a sublime grasp of philosophy and all of the theological and ideological issues that are spoken of in his work.
According to Maimonides, he wrote the Guide for the Perplexed to promote the true understanding of the real spirit of the law, to guide those religious persons who, adhering to the Torah, have studied philosophy and are embarrassed by the contradictions between the teachings of philosophy and the literal sense of the Torah. His other groundbreaking literature was the Mishnah Torah, which is a code of Jewish religious law. The Mishnah Torah was compiled between 1170 and 1180, while Maimonides was living in Egypt, and is regarded as Maimonides' magnum opus. It is the only medieval-era work that details all of Jewish observance, including those laws that are only applicable when the Holy Temple is in existence, and remains an important work in Judaism. Contemporary reaction was mixed, with strong and immediate opposition focusing on the absence of sources and the belief that the work appeared to be intended to supersede study of the Talmud. Maimonides responded to these criticisms, and the Mishnah Torah endures as an influential work in Jewish religious thought.
Rambam is known in the Jewish tradition as one of the greatest of the Jewish physicians of that period, and Muslim sources also cite him as a well-known and famous physician of the time. He was very well grounded in Greek medicine. He was very well grounded in Islamic medicine and medical theories. He was one of the first people to speak about the treatment of depression, and he himself experienced depression in his life. He speaks of diet, he speaks of exercise, he speaks of context, he speaks of all sorts of things, which we would today perhaps call psychosomatic medicine. But he wrote at great length on the treatment of depression, but yet he was also one of the first physicians who spoke about the role of the spirit in physical health. He writes of the soul, he writes of the mind, he writes of all the various influences which we begin to speak of today in terms of the treatment of depression and mental illness. In a famous letter to one of his students, he writes that most of his day was spent in seeing patients from the morning till the night, and then he would have to treat the Sultan and the Sultan's family, and then at night, then he would write and he would learn. He was literally the intellectual rock and giant of the medieval Jewish community. His place of burial is in Tiberias, in Israel. It's been my privilege to be there and literally take a seat and meditate and converse as one does with him. And one was aware during all that time of the greatness of the soul and the personality buried and entombed in front of one. So that when we speak of Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam, Maimonides, we speak of a kind of soul that comes onto the planet not very frequently and encompasses so much. He was a person larger than life, and almost every direction of Jewish scholarship, thought, emerges out of his work, even centuries later.
The Tolerance Center is one of 3 branches of the Vilna Gaon State Jewish Museum in Lithuania. Displaying a rich history of the Jewish community, it includes sacred, modern and traditional art alongside historical Judaica. Simcha paid a visit to Lithuania to find out more about the history of this museum.
It is a Jewish museum. It is Vilna's Gaon Jewish Museum in Lithuania. We have 3 buildings. This Jewish Museum, Tolerance Center, the building in the Paminkalno 12, it is Holocaust exhibition, and in Pilimo number 4, we have a Jewish community and we have a part of Jewish Museum. It is 3 buildings. It is very old building. Jewish community was built this building in the beginning of 20th century. And Jewish community was built the Jewish Philharmonic. It was the building where concerts. And in this building, 1922, worked Jewish theater in Yiddish. But it was before the war. In this building worked and Maccabi office, and it was Jewish communities building where Jewish people went to the concerts, to the spectacles, to some lectures, and it was a very famous building in Vilna.
The museum first opened its doors in 1913, and on the eve of the Second World War, it had accumulated more than 6,000 books, historical works and documents. But by the end of the war, almost all were destroyed. During the period between 1941 and 1943, the theatre within the museum became a place where artists and musicians could express themselves. This little theatre responded to despair with song, satire, and amazingly, criticism of the Nazi regime, proving that theatre can provide courage and hope, even amidst atrocity.
After the war, and you can see these old walls, you can see this old windows, it was renovation, but you can see the old walls of this building that was before the war. After the war, it was in Soviet time, it was a cinema, the cinema for the children. I was a little girl, I went to the cinema, I looked the films about children, Soviet children, and later, it was this building's renovation. It was this building renovation, and you can see that in this building now works Jewish Museum and Tolerance Center. Tolerance Center, that in this building you can see the people from all communities. It was a seminars of these communities. It was a conference, and we have a concerts from people from all world.
The museum continuously researches, collects and exhibits material on Jewish history and culture in Lithuania. The museum staff assists the Lithuanian population and visitors to acquire knowledge about the history, destruction and contemporary life of Lithuanian Jews.
And that brings us to the end of today's show. Thanks for tuning in, and please do join us again next Sunday. As always, from me, Nikki, and the entire team, shalom and have a safe and peaceful week.